Her daughter-in-law smashed her phone, right in front of the grandkids. Patricia Green didn't shout. She didn't beg. By Monday her will was rewritten, her deed was sealed inside a trust, and Lori's name, gone. She'd spent a lifetime building that home, now she was fortifying it. No drama, no second warnings. And when Lori came to claim her forever kitchen, the paperwork answered for her. Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The sound of glass shattering against hardwood brought the room to a standstill, not the kind of clumsy accident that gets covered with laughter. This was sharp, deliberate, a noise that pulled every eye toward the center of Patricia Green's living room. Seconds earlier, the house had been full of warmth. The fireplace glowed in the August dusk, casting amber light over half-eaten pot roast and crumpled napkin. Pat, perched in her favorite armchair under the window, had snapped a quick photo of the grandkids playing near the coffee table, their heads bent over a jigsaw puzzle. No flash, no announcement, just a quiet moment she wanted to keep. Lori saw. "Did you just take a picture of my kids?" she demanded, voice slicing through the easy hum of conversation. Pat didn't look up. "They looked sweet," she said simply, sliding her phone onto the end table beside her. Lori stood from the couch, her wine glass trembling slightly in her hand. "Delete it." "I won't," Pat said. Not unkindly. It was a nice moment. There's nothing wrong with a grandmother taking a photo. "You didn't ask." Lori's voice dropped lower. "You never ask." Evan shifted uncomfortably beside her but said nothing. As usual. Before Pat could rise or offer another word, Lori stepped forward and snatched the phone off the table. Then she hurled it to the floor. The impact echoed, brittle, final, as Pat's phone shattered into a spray of black glass and pale plastic against the hickory floor. Everyone froze. Even the kids. Lori, Evan's voice barely registered above a whisper. He didn't move. Didn't stand. Didn't scold. Lori shrugged. It was old. Honestly, it's probably a favor. Pat stood slowly, her joints stiff, her face unreadable. She crossed the room and bent to collect the wreckage piece by piece. The cracked screen, its spider web fractures glinting under the recessed lights. The pale blue case, a gift from Martha, snapped clean in half. The SIM card skittered away and lodged under the baseboard. She dropped the remains into the kitchen trash can without ceremony and returned to the living room, wiping her hands on a dish towel, like she'd just handled something dirty. Lori had already returned to her seat, casually sipping from her glass. "We'll get you a new one. Don't be so dramatic." Pat didn't respond. She sat back down in her chair, lifted her wine glass, and stared into it for a long moment. The family picked awkwardly at dessert. The grandkids whispered among themselves. Evan kept his eyes on his lap. The only sound was the clink of forks and the hum of the fridge in the other room. When they left an hour later, Pat stood at the door, offering a polite goodbye to everyone, even Lori. Especially Lori. No one mentioned the phone again. Once the house was quiet, she poured herself a fresh glass of Merlot and sat alone in the living room, the scent of cinnamon pie still lingering faintly in the air. Her hand drifted to the empty side table where the phone had been. Martha's voice echoed in her head from earlier that week. "Don't let her walk around like she owns the place, Pat. She thinks that house is already hers." Pat's gaze lifted above the mantel to the framed document that had hung there for years. The deed. Crisp parchment, matted behind museum glass, the seal embossed with the Franklin County Clerk's Office logo. One name on it. Just one. Patricia L. Green. She took a slow sip of wine, her eyes narrowing. Lori thought she'd broken a phone. She hadn't realized she'd just shattered something much bigger. "She's lucky I didn't throw the lamp," Lori said, loud enough to be heard through the front windows. "It was a 5-year-old phone. She should be thanking me." Pat stood just inside the foyer, arms crossed, watching the tail lights of Evan and Lori's SUV glow red as they backed out of the driveway. The house was finally still again, but the silence wasn't comforting tonight. It was laced with something colder, something final. She didn't flinch, didn't move, just watched them disappear into the dark street. A few minutes later, 3 light knocks tapped against the back door, 2 short, one after a pause. Pat didn't need to ask who it was. She opened the door, and there stood Martha Phillips, holding a container of lemon bars like she'd been waiting all evening for a reason to drop by. Her gray hair was clipped back, her windbreaker only zipped halfway. No pleasantries, just so, she really smashed your phone. Pat stepped aside to let her in. Right in front of the kids. Jesus, Martha muttered, setting the container on the counter. Did Evan grow a spine? Or, he offered to replace it, Pat said, flat. Didn't say a single word to her about it. Martha opened the fridge and grabbed the milk like it was her own kitchen. She's testing boundaries. She thinks she lives here already. Pat pulled 2 glasses down from the cabinet. Like it's guaranteed. Martha raised an eyebrow. Is it? Pat met her eyes. Steady. Not if I can help it. They sat at the kitchen table, lemon bars untouched between them. The refrigerator hummed softly in the background, and the wall clock ticked in the quiet. After a long moment, Pat rose from the table and disappeared down the hall. When she returned, she carried a thick, beige folder, a little worn at the corners, paper inside neatly tabbed. She set it down in front of Martha. Estate file, she said. Martha leaned in as Pat flipped through the tabs. Healthcare directives, financial accounts, final arrangements. And then the one that mattered most. Property. Pat stopped there. The deed to the house lay nestled in a clear sleeve, the bold print of her name standing alone, unmistakable. Martha looked down at it, then up at her friend. She really thinks this place is hers? She asked. She acts like she's earned it, Pat said, voice quiet but sharp. But this house has history. I fought for it, built a life in it, and she just walks in, takes over, and treats it like a showroom. Martha's tone softened. What are you thinking? Pat closed the folder, her fingers resting lightly on top of it. That maybe it's time I stop assuming everyone around me knows where the line is. They sat in silence again, but something in the room had shifted. The calm was no longer passive. It was deliberate. Martha finally stood. You want me to bring pie next time, or a lawyer? Pat smiled. Maybe both. Martha grinned. Call me when you're ready. She left the kitchen the way she'd come, light on her feet, like someone exiting a stage. Pat stayed behind, staring at the folder on the table. Her hand moved to flip it open again. She turned to the deed one more time. Just her name. Unshared. Undisputed. Unbreakable. She traced the edge of the paper with her fingertip. Steady and calm. The phone was gone. But this was still hers. And she intended to keep it that way. Pat was already dressed and seated at the kitchen table, before the sun cracked the sky. Her coffee steamed in a bone-white mug, untouched. Her estate file sat beside it. Pages neatly fanned out, deed on top like a battle flag. Across the table sat her landline, cord wrapped tight, base smudged with age, waiting. She didn't hesitate. At 8 a.m. sharp, she dialed. Jonas Keller's office, came the receptionist's voice, bright and brisk. This is Patricia Green, she said. I need to speak with Mr. Keller. It's urgent. Within 5 minutes, the line clicked. Pat came Jonas's voice, measured, gravel-toned, alert. What happened? She drew in a breath. My daughter-in-law smashed my phone yesterday, in front of the whole family, including the grandkids. Jonas didn't respond immediately. She could picture him leaning back in his leather chair, the way he always did when something ugly was taking shape. She said what, exactly? He asked. She told me to delete a photo. I said no. She took the phone and smashed it on the floor. Laughed afterward. Evan didn't stop her. Another pause. Then cool and calm. Let's make sure she never holds the keys. Pat exhaled slowly. That was why she'd called him. Jonas didn't ask for drama. He asked for details. Then solved the problem. She thinks this house will be theirs someday. Pat said, voice steady. She speaks like she owns it already. I want to make it very clear, that day is never coming. What about your son? Jonas asked. Is he part of this behavior, or just enabling it? Evan's not malicious, she said, after a beat. But he's not going to protect me from her either. He folds every time. I see. Jonas's voice shifted into work mode. Then we get proactive. Start with restructuring the will, but more importantly, let's transfer the house into a living trust. It gives you full control while you're alive, and removes ambiguity when you're gone. Pat felt something click inside her. The rage from Sunday was still there, but it had cooled into something sharper now. Something surgical. I don't want her getting even a whiff of this property, she said. She won't, Jonas said. We'll write it so tight even termites couldn't crawl through the language. Pat let out the first real smile she'd managed since Sunday night. I'll need Martha listed as co-trustee, she said. She's the only one I trust to co-sign if I'm not able. Smart, Jonas replied. We'll also structure it to bypass probate. No loopholes. No legal wiggle room for anyone else. From outside the window, the morning buzz of sprinklers hummed to life. A delivery van passed down the street. It was a normal Monday in the neighborhood. Porches swept, flags fluttering, dogs barking 2 streets over. But inside that kitchen, the ground was quietly shifting. I can come in tomorrow, Pat said. Come in today, Jonas replied. Let's move before Lori gets bold again. Pat hung up, her coffee now lukewarm, but her blood warm with purpose. She gathered the estate file, slid the papers back into order, and clipped the folder shut. Her movements were slow but firm, like someone tightening the final screw on a safe. As she stood, her landline rang again. She almost didn't answer it, but curiosity tugged. Mrs. Green? Came Jonas's voice again, a bit more animated now.
Oh, more thing.
We can do more than just change the will. She paused, hand hovering over the kitchen chair. Go on. If you want real peace, Jonas said, we don't just protect the house. We build a wall around it so high, she never sees over it. The next day, Pat met Renee at the real estate agency. Pat didn't knock. She never had to. Renee Mills looked up from her computer and smiled as soon as she saw her. Morning. You're early. I like early, Pat said, stepping into the tidy office. The real estate agency smelled faintly of lavender and ink, and a soft hum came from the printer in the corner. Framed closing day photos lined the walls, smiling families clutching keys, sold signs, promises fulfilled. Pat wasn't here to make promises. She was here to make sure one stayed unbroken. I spoke with Jonas, Renee said, motioning her toward a seat. He said you want to move fast. I do. Lori's already treating my house like it's a hand-me-down. I want it locked down tight. Renee nodded. Let's walk through it together. I'll make notes for the transfer paperwork. The morning light followed them room by room. Pat moved with intention, pointing out key features, not to show off, but to catalog. The original hardwood floors. The kitchen cabinets her husband installed the year before he passed. The attic insulation she'd had upgraded 2 winters ago after a leak. This place is more than square footage, Pat said. It's every decision I made without help. Renee took notes on her clipboard, nodding as they moved through the house. You've taken care of it. That counts for a lot. When they reached the upstairs landing, Pat paused in the doorway of the guest room. She calls this the nursery, she said dryly. Said they'll paint it sage green when they take over. Renee didn't respond, just kept writing. Back in the kitchen, Renee laid the clipboard on the island. Here's my recommendation. Move the house into a revocable living trust, effective immediately. It keeps your name on the asset, but protects it from any future claims. Lori won't see a dime of it. Not now, not later. And if I pass before Evan? Pat asked. Your successor trustee, Martha, if that's who you want, would control it. You decide what happens to the house, not Evan, and certainly not Lori. Pat nodded. Do it. Renee smiled. We'll have everything ready by Friday. Just then, the screen door creaked and closed. Martha stepped in, holding a white bakery box. Brought pie, she said cheerfully. Because I'm assuming we're celebrating the wall you're about to build around your castle. Pat raised a brow. It's not finished yet, which is why I brought two. One for today, one for Friday. Renee laughed. Smart. Pat didn't. I'll celebrate when the ink's dry. That night, the house was still. Pat sat in the sunroom, with a cup of tea and her temporary phone, scrolling through a few messages from neighbors. Then a new text came through. Lori, no words, just a photo. She had rearranged the living room. The fireplace now featured a giant framed print above the mantel that read Our Castle in swirling white cursive. New throw pillows. A patterned rug that clashed with everything. And Lori standing in front, grinning wide, one hand on her hip, the other gesturing toward the room like she was giving a tour. The caption forever starts. Now Pat stared at the image. Her own reading chair, the one by the window she sat in every evening, was gone. Pat set the phone down, slow and deliberate. This wasn't just decorating. Lori was laying claim, before the ink was even dry. The pen in Pat's hand didn't shake, not like it had when she signed the mortgage, or when she signed the hospice papers. This time, her grip was steady, and her intent sharper than any dotted line in front of her. Across the desk, Jonas Keller adjusted his glasses and slid the trust documents toward her. The office was quiet, except for the low hum of the air vent and the faint tapping of Martha's shoe against the floor. Initial here, Jonas said. Then here and sign on the last page. Pat glanced down at the thick stack of legal paper, her name printed cleanly at the top. The title of the trust, the Greenhouse Trust, co-managed by Patricia L. Green and Martha Phillips. Not Evan, not Lori. She signed once, then twice. And when she reached the final line, she paused, not out of hesitation but for emphasis. She signed with a slow, deliberate stroke. A silence followed, not awkward, not tense, just complete. Then Jonas gathered the papers, clipped them into a leather folder, and said, "It's done. Effective immediately. The house is now legally held in trust. No part of it belongs to your heirs until the trust says so, which in this case means never." Pat sat back in her chair, exhaling through her nose. Martha beside her handed her a peppermint from her purse like it was a trophy. "Nice to see the system work for someone who actually deserves the property," Martha muttered. Jonas smiled, but then added, "One more addition we discussed, this clause." He flipped to a final page pointing, "No action regarding sale, refinancing or future transfer of the house can be executed without Martha's signature as co-trustee." Pat blinked. "Even if I wanted to move it to someone." "You can't do it alone," Jonas confirmed. "That way if someone manipulates you down the line, or tries to rush you into anything, they'll hit a wall." Martha leaned back, arms crossed. "I've got my pen ready." Pat reached for her bag, her entire body feeling 10 pounds lighter. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel like she was defending herself. She was fortifying her legacy. Jonas stood and shook her hand. "You did the right thing, Pat. Most people wait too long." Pat gave him a small, grateful smile. Let's just say the timing presented itself. Outside the sun was crisp and bright, casting long shadows over the concrete steps. Martha linked her arm through Pat's as they walked to the car. "You still want to wait on that pie?" she asked, hopeful. "Let me have 1 minute to enjoy breathing first," Pat replied. "Then maybe lemon meringue." Before she could start the ignition, her phone buzzed in her purse. "Renee," Pat answered. "Tell me something good." "Something great," Renee said. "The trust is officially registered. Franklin County stamped it 10 minutes ago. You're locked in, Pat. Congratulations." Pat smiled and finally started the car. "Thank you, Renee." She didn't say "we did it," because Lori would never understand. It wasn't a team sport. That evening, the family gathered for their regular Thursday dinner. The kids were laughing in the living room. Evan was on his second serving of lasagna, and Lori was swirling her wine, watching Pat like a cat watches a mouse trying to cross the kitchen. The tension between them buzzed underneath the surface, but no one named it. Until dessert. Lori set down her glass and said in a voice loud enough to hush the kids, "When we inherit this place, I'm gutting the kitchen. These cabinets, awful. We need an island. Open shelves. Quartz, not that laminate stuff." Evan didn't react. The room froze. Pat's fork hung in the air. Martha, seated at the end of the table, slowly folded her napkin and looked up. Lori was smiling. Certain, oblivious. Pat's fork hovered in the air for one long suspended moment, not shaking, not clenched, just paused. Across the table, Lori laughed lightly and went on twirling her wine glass by the stem like she was presenting to a design team. "I mean, I love a good farmhouse sink," Lori said, gesturing with her free hand, "but the plumbing in this place, ancient. We'll need to gut the whole thing if we want a proper flow. Maybe blow out that back wall and extend the kitchen." The table had gone quiet. Even the kids, halfway through their peach cobbler, were looking at their plates. Evan chewed slower than usual, glancing between his wife and his mother like he couldn't figure out where to land. Pat gently placed her fork down beside her napkin. She didn't say a word. She stood, smoothed the front of her blouse, and calmly said, "Excuse me." Then she walked out of the dining room. Not into the kitchen. Not to the restroom. Out the front door. The air outside was thick with the late summer scent of cut grass and hot pavement. She didn't grab her purse. She didn't need shoes beyond her house slippers. She just walked past the hydrangeas lining the porch, down the front steps, and out to the sidewalk where her shadow stretched long in the evening sun. Inside, the murmuring picked up. Lori asking, "What's her problem now?" Evan saying her name like a question he didn't want answered. But Pat didn't turn around. She kept walking. Evan called an hour later. "Mom?" She was on the sunroom couch with a cup of tea and her laptop open. Her tone was mild. "Yes, you just left." "I know." A pause. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine." She didn't mean anything by what she said. She meant every word. Pat replied gently. "She just didn't think I'd hear her like I did." He didn't respond right away. She heard a door close in the background, probably the upstairs bedroom. "You didn't even stay for dessert," he said finally, like that would sway something. "I had other things to do." The tea had long gone cold by the time Pat opened her estate file again. The weight of it felt different now, no longer reactionary, but refined. She scrolled through her email inbox until she saw Jonas's name. Subject, Trust Confirmation plus Final Docs. She clicked it open. There they were. Signed PDFs, legal confirmations, everything locked down. The trust was official, binding, and on file. She downloaded the attachments and placed them in a new folder labeled Privet. Do not share. Then she opened a blank document titled Final Directives. Her fingers moved with clarity. No rage, no sadness, just certainty. Later she called Martha. She said she's planning to gut the kitchen. Pat said, relaying the dinner conversation. Martha sighed through the speaker. "She's planning a coronation, and she doesn't even own the castle." I didn't yell. I didn't defend myself. I just stood up and left. "I'm proud of you," Martha said. "You didn't feed the fire." "No," Pat replied, clicking save on the new document. "I poured water on the foundation instead." That night, just before bed, Pat made chamomile tea and checked her phone one last time. A notification popped up. Lori Green posted a photo. She tapped it. It was a close-up of a Pinterest-style vision board, brass hardware, marble countertops, a kitchen island shaped like a T. Overlaid text in a modern script read, "Our forever home mood board Salon Len." The caption underneath said, "Can't wait for our forever home to be perfect. Next chapter #. Dream Kitchen." There were already 9 likes and 2 comments from her friends. So exciting. Manifesting it into reality, girl. Pat stared at the screen, unmoved. She didn't comment, didn't like, didn't even screenshot it. She just closed the app, turned off the light, and went to bed. Lori's Pinterest board had grown overnight. Farmhouse sinks, arched doorways, statement lighting fixtures. One photo had been saved 4 times, to a board titled Kitchen Takeover. Our forever home. Pat stared at it from her office computer. the cursor blinking like a heartbeat. Lori was manifesting a future with both feet planted in someone else's foundation. Pat didn't comment. She didn't warn. She just opened the hall closet and grabbed the packing tape. The house was quiet as Pat moved through the living room, slipping framed photos from their spots on the mantel. She wrapped each in tissue and placed them gently into a small box labeled Memories, not theirs. Some furniture followed. One of the antique armchairs in the sunroom, the delicate end table from the guest room, a few handmade quilts folded and tucked neatly into a cedar chest. It wasn't drastic. It wasn't even obvious to the untrained eye. But Pat knew what she was doing, just in case. By the weekend, Martha was dragging a metal step stool into the attic. "What exactly are we looking to lighten?" she asked, already pulling cobwebs off her sleeves. "Everything they'd assume is theirs someday," Pat said, handing her a storage bin. "Photo albums, my mother's china, the good crystal, the baby blanket I knitted when Evan was born." Martha raised a brow. "You're not burning it all down, are you?" "Of course not," Pat said with a smile. "I'm preserving what matters. The house will outlive me, but it won't become hers." They worked in companionable silence. Dust floated in the sunlight slanting through the attic vent, and the smell of old cedar and forgotten Christmas boxes surrounded them. Every taped box was a boundary, every sealed bin, a line Lori would never cross. Monday afternoon, Pat heard the garage door open. She wasn't expecting anyone. Then the kitchen door creaked, and Evan stepped in. "Hey, Mom," he said cautiously, glancing around. "You weren't answering your phone." "I was in the attic," Pat said. She wiped her hands on a dish towel. "What brings you by?" He paused, taking in the living room. Less cluttered, more open. "Where's the wingback chair?" he asked. "And the trunk from the hallway?" "In storage," Pat replied, folding the towel, just lightening the load. Evan frowned slightly but didn't push. "Lori said she saw boxes through the window. She's confused." "I'm not." Pat's voice was soft but firm. He nodded, silent for a beat. Then, "Are you mad about the kitchen comment?" "No," Pat said. "I'm protecting what's mine. That's all." The next morning, Renee arrived with a clipboard and a structured smile. "Time for the appraisal," she said, stepping inside and glancing around. "Wow, it's already staged better than half the listings I see." Pat chuckled. "Not staged, just prepared." They walked through the home slowly, Renee taking notes, occasionally running her hand along the banister, or peering up at the crown molding. "The market's strong," she said. "If you ever did want to rent it or sell down the line, you're in an excellent position." Pat said nothing, just nodded. She wasn't planning to sell. But planning? Oh, she was absolutely planning. That evening, just before dinner, Pat's cell rang. "Lori." She let it buzz once, twice. Then she answered. "You've got some nerve," Lori snapped before Pat could say a word. "Evan said the house is half empty. Are you seriously boxing up our future?" Pat leaned back in her chair. "You'll have to be more specific." "You know what I mean," Lori said, her voice rising. "You're ruining the inheritance, our inheritance." "No," Pat said, calm and unshaken. "I'm reclaiming my home. You were never meant to inherit it." Lori went quiet, just for a moment. Then she hissed, "You can't cut us out. It's not fair." And Pat, staring out the window at her freshly swept porch, simply said, "Watch me." Pat set the envelope on the table with the same care she used to set out Thanksgiving silver, neatly centered, edges aligned. Its weight wasn't in the paper, it was in what it ended. 3 chairs, no food, no candles, just silence, thick as storm clouds. At 5:59, the doorbell rang. She didn't rush. She opened the door just as Evan lifted his hand to knock. Lori was already a step ahead of him, breezing in with sunglasses perched on her head, and a voice sharpened to provoke. "So," Lori said, glancing around like she was inspecting a hotel lobby, "what's this big talk about? We could have done this over text." Pat said nothing, just motioned to the dining table. Lori dropped her purse into a chair without asking. Evan hovered before sitting, visibly uneasy. The quiet stretched. Pat sat last. I thought it was time we spoke clearly, she said, her tone even. Oh, clearly, Lori laughed. Like how you've been stashing furniture and whispering with Martha. That kind of clarity. Pat didn't blink. Like what's mine, and what isn't. Lori's eyes narrowed. Let me guess. You're finally ready to admit we should be planning the remodel. I've got ideas for the kitchen, and the front entry. Evan shifted in his seat. Lori, but Pat slid the manila envelope across the table. Read it. Lori rolled her eyes. But Evan reached for it first, opening the flap like it might explode. He pulled out the papers, scanned the first page, and froze. What is it? Lori asked, impatient. It's a living trust, he murmured. A what? She snapped. Pat spoke clearly. The house is no longer in my name alone. It's held in trust, one I control. Martha is my co-trustee. Lori blinked. What does that even mean? It means, Pat said, this house isn't yours now or ever. It's protected. From entitlement, from assumptions, from both of you. Evan looked up, pale. You locked it away? I safeguarded it. Pat said, you're not being punished, Evan. You're just not entitled. There's a difference. Lori stood, voice rising like a siren. This is illegal. You can't just rewrite your estate to cut us out. You're not allowed. It's perfectly legal, Pat said, unflinching. Filed. Recorded. Witnessed. Enforceable. This is my house. Lori shouted, slapping a palm against the table. We built our life around this. The kids, Evan's kids, have grown up here. No, Pat said slowly. They've visited here. They've played on my rugs. Eaten at my table. But this house isn't theirs. It's not yours. You smashed a phone and thought you were breaking glass. You were breaking your claim. Lori's chest rose and fell. Her voice cracked as she reached for anything that sounded like leverage. So what now? You live in your little fortress until you die, and then hand it off to the mailman? Pat didn't answer. Instead, a voice came from the hallway. She's handing it to someone who actually respects it. They all turned. Martha stood just inside the entryway, holding a leather planner and wearing a smile that could slice drywall. A half step behind her, Jonas Keller entered the room with the calm precision of a surgeon. He carried a slim briefcase and wore a neutral expression that said everything and nothing at once. Oh, good, Martha said, walking toward the table. You're all here. Jonas set the case on the buffet and unlatched it with a quiet click. Lori looked between them, eyes wide. You brought backup? No, Pat said. I brought facts. Jonas didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He stood at the end of Pat's dining table, flipping slowly through the thick packet of trust paperwork, while Lori and Evan sat frozen across from him. Martha perched comfortably in the armchair nearby, sipped from a steaming mug of coffee, and looked entirely unbothered, as if she were watching a procedural drama she'd already seen twice. This document, Jonas said calmly, tapping the top page with his pen, was executed lawfully, notarized, and recorded with the Franklin County Clerk's office. It places full ownership of the property into a living trust, managed jointly by Patricia Green and Martha Phillips. Lori's face was red, her lips were parted, but no sound came out yet. Jonas continued, unfazed. What that means is this: no one, not a son, not a daughter-in-law, not even a spouse of a potential heir, can make a claim on this home, now or in the future, unless explicitly named as a beneficiary. You are not named. But I'm— Lori tried to speak, then stumbled. I'm family, you can't just erase us. I haven't erased anyone, Pat said from her chair. Her voice was even, but her eyes were cold steel. I've just made the boundaries real. Evan looked pale. His shoulders hunched as he flipped through the packet again, slower this time, as if hoping a line had changed since the last read. You need to do something, Lori hissed, turning sharply to him. Say something. Evan shook his head. There's nothing to say. It's done. It's legal. She's protected it. Protected it. Lori's voice cracked. From us? Jonas stepped back, folding his hands. From entitlement, Miss Green. This home was never yours to lose. The silence that followed was thick with disbelief and fury. Lori stood abruptly, her chair screeching across the floor. Martha stirred her coffee gently and took another sip. If looks could sue, she murmured. Lori turned her fire back toward Pat. You're unbelievable. After everything, holidays, birthdays, helping around here, this is how you repay us. You smashed my phone in front of my grandchildren, Pat replied coolly, and laughed about it. I was upset. You've been upset, Pat said. For years. At my rules, my space, my decisions. This house didn't owe you anything, Lori. Neither do I. Lori's chest rose and fell rapidly. You think locking it in a vault gives you power? You're just afraid to let go. Pat stood, slowly. Her voice dropped. No. I finally did. Lori stared at her a beat longer, then turned and stormed down the hallway. The front door slammed so hard the kitchen cabinets rattled. The silence after was long and delicious. Martha grinned into her coffee. That went better than I expected. Jonas tucked the trust back into his briefcase. She'll challenge nothing. She has no legal standing and no claim of expectation. This was the cleanest execution of a trust I've ever seen. Pat reached over and touched his hand. Thank you for coming in person. He gave her a small nod. It's one thing to put protections on paper, but some truths need to be delivered face to face. Evan lingered in the dining room, still silent, his head low. I should go after her, he said eventually. Pat didn't reply. She didn't stop him either. A half hour later, Pat was rinsing mugs in the sink when her phone buzzed on the counter. Renee. She dried her hands and answered. Hey, what's up? Renee's voice was upbeat but cautious. I know you're not listing the house yet, but I just got off the phone with a client, older couple from Cincinnati looking to move to Columbus. They saw a photo from when I did the appraisal, and they want to make an offer, full price. No contingencies. Pat blinked. But the house isn't even on the market. I know, Renee said. But the offer stands. They're okay with it staying in the trust. They're not looking for a deal. They're looking for a home. The offer was typed in crisp black ink on heavy cream paper, as if the weight of the cardstock might make it more convincing. Pat held it in her hands like it might combust. Renee sat across from her at the kitchen table, tablet open, glasses low on her nose. They saw the appraisal photos. Said the front porch reminded them of a home they lost in a flood 30 years ago. Pat looked toward that same porch, bathed in late morning light, the white railing newly painted, the swing still creaking slightly from last night's breeze. And they want to pay full price? Pat asked. Not just full, Renee said. They offered 5% over asking, in cash. No contingencies. The trust structure doesn't bother them. They've dealt with trusts before. Pat set the offer down. The kitchen smelled faintly of fresh basil and lemon polish. Her tea sat untouched. They're not just buying a house, Renee. They're buying a line in the sand, which is why I haven't answered them yet, Renee said. I didn't want to push. Pat nodded slowly. Thank you. Renee hesitated, then leaned in. You could keep it in trust and rent it out, you know. I've got tenants lined up every month looking for short-term stays, executives, relocation clients, even traveling nurses. We'd screen every one. You'd earn income. And she gave a knowing smile. Lori would hate that. Pat let out a short, surprised laugh. She thinks renters are a moral failing. All the more reason, Renee said with a wink. Later that day, Pat discussed the idea with Martha over lunch at the diner. They sat in a red vinyl booth under the hum of fluorescent lights and the smell of grease and coffee. Let me get this straight, Martha said between bites of grilled cheese. You're telling me we could keep the house, keep it under lock and key, and still make money off it. That's the idea. I'd co-manage it with you, Martha said immediately, dabbing her mouth. You know I love a good clipboard and a background check. Pat smiled. I thought you might. Martha leaned in. We'd rotate seasonal decor. Get cute little guest baskets. I've always wanted to buy those tiny soaps shaped like fruit. Pat stirred her iced tea, staring into the glass. I never thought I'd consider it, renting out my home. But it's not about losing it anymore. It's about controlling what it becomes. You're not surrendering it, Martha said. You're repurposing it. Lori can't haunt what she's not invited to. That evening, Pat called Jonas. Can you draft a lease agreement for short-term tenants, trust-held property, co-managed by me and Martha? Jonas, ever efficient, didn't miss a beat. Absolutely. I'll keep it flexible, month to month. Ironclad clauses about property damage, quiet hours, and full authority resting with you both. Good, Pat said. Let's make sure no one ever gets in the door who shouldn't. At 9:42 p.m., her phone buzzed. One new message. Lori. The preview alone made Pat exhale through her nose. Lori, so you're turning our home into a hotel now? Pat didn't reply. She let the words hang on the screen like smoke in the air. Then she slid the phone face down on the coffee table and reached for her book. But the message had done its job. It told her exactly what she needed to know. Lori had found out, and she was unraveling. By noon, Lori had sent 5 texts, each longer than the last. The first came with a screenshot of a property listing, someone else's, not Pat's, followed by a captioned threat. If you're going to sell, just admit it. We deserve to know. This was supposed to be ours. The second was a full paragraph, something about betrayal and teaching the kids what family shouldn't look like. The third, Pat didn't even finish reading it. She silenced her phone and turned her attention to the man standing in her front hallway with a tape measure and a clipboard. I'm not gutting anything, she said. Just fresh paint, some modern fixtures, and maybe new window treatments. Neutral tones. Something clean but warm. The contractor, late 30s, flannel shirt, hands dusted with sawdust from his last job, nodded. Durable and tenant-proof. Got it. Want us to keep the trim? I stained that trim myself after my husband passed. It stays. He smiled. Noted. Pat led him through the rooms she'd already cleared with Martha: guest bedroom, living room, sunroom, explaining what she wanted without ever once apologizing for the change. The house was evolving. So was she. By the time the contractor left, 3 new messages had arrived. One with a crying emoji, one with a screenshot of a Zillow estimate, and one with a single line. Do you even care about what this does to Evan? She deleted none of them. She answered none of them. Instead, she opened the junk drawer, pulled out a small box she'd kept for years, and placed it gently on the kitchen counter. Inside was a keychain, a bronze lighthouse with the words "Find Your Way Home" engraved on the back. It had been a stocking stuffer one Christmas, a joke at the time, a message now. At 4:17 p.m., Evan knocked softly on the front door. She let him in. He looked tired, wrinkled t-shirt, hair still damp from a rushed shower. His voice was low when he spoke. She's not doing well. She's not doing well. I figured. She said you're turning the house into a rental just to punish her. Pat poured herself a glass of water and leaned against the sink. Is that what you think? He hesitated. I think she feels targeted. Pat stepped forward and placed the keychain in his hand. This is for your place, not mine. Evan stared down at the charm, then at her. You're really doing this? I already have, she said gently. You're welcome here anytime, but you won't be inheriting this house. That door's closed. His shoulders dropped, not in anger, in resignation. I didn't mean for it to go this way, he said. I know, Pat replied, but you didn't stop it either. That night, Pat and Martha sat on the back porch under the soft buzz of string lights, sipping white wine from stemless glasses, and watching the cicadas buzz in waves. To reclaiming peace, Martha said, raising her glass. To not apologizing for it, Pat replied. They clinked gently. Martha glanced toward the street. Renee says she's already got 3 families interested. Short-term lease. Good money. Quiet people. I want someone who waters plants and pays rent on time, Pat said with a smile. Not someone who throws tantrums over throw pillows. Martha snorted. The night air smelled like cut grass and fresh dirt. Inside, the kitchen was stripped down, clean, ready for its new role. No ghosts, no promises. Just before midnight, Pat's phone buzzed again. This time, not a message. A post. Lori Green, you can try to take someone's house, their money, their control, but you'll never erase what they built. You'll never steal their future. Beneath it, a photo of Lori in front of the house, smiling with her arms crossed like it still belonged to her. Comments trickled in. What happened? You deserve better, girl. Smash the patriarchy and the matriarchy too, apparently. Pat read it once, then set the phone face down again. By sunrise, the post had reached 3 neighborhood Facebook groups and 2 next-door threads. A filtered selfie of Lori standing with her arms folded in front of Pat's house, her caption bold and righteous. You can steal a home, but you can't steal dignity. I was supposed to raise my kids here. Now I'm watching it be turned into a rental for strangers. Betrayal, plain and simple. Underneath it, a flood of likes, sad face emojis, and sympathy from strangers who didn't know any better. But they weren't the only ones reading. Pat sat at her kitchen table, phone in hand, fingers resting lightly on the screen. She didn't comment. She didn't react. Instead, she waited and watched as truth began to do what it always does, crawl back to the surface. By mid-morning, her friend group had found it. Marlene from down the street commented first, "Didn't you smash her phone in front of your kids? Maybe start there, Lori." Then June chimed in, "This woman has let you live in her house for years, for free, and this is how you repay her." Then the tide turned. Comments multiplied. Sympathy flipped to scrutiny. Lori tried replying to a few defensive, sarcastic, but she couldn't keep up with the tide. Renee called just before noon. "I'm sending this to Jonas," she said. "I've screenshotted everything, the posts, the comments, even the story she tried to post and then deleted." "Thank you," Pat said, standing by the kitchen window with the curtain pulled slightly aside. Outside, the flower beds were quiet, trimmed, calm. She crossed a line. Renee added, "And that's your house she used as her backdrop." Pat nodded slowly. "Let's make it the last time she does." Jonas didn't waste time. By 3 p.m., he'd already sent Pat a PDF labeled Draft, CEs and Desist Defamation, Ul Green. It was 3 pages, direct, precise, ironclad, the kind of letter that made inboxes go cold. Pat read it twice, once as a homeowner, once as a mom. She felt both versions of herself satisfied. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees and the house turned gold at the edges, Evan called. "Mom, I know you saw the post," he said without preamble. She was upset. It was impulsive. Pat didn't respond right away. "I talked to her," Evan went on. "She's willing to take it down if you just let it go. No lawyers, just de-escalate." "No," Pat said flatly. There was a pause on the line. "She's embarrassed. She's getting dragged online. I'm asking, please, just let this die quietly." "She didn't keep it quiet," Pat said. "And you didn't stop her. So no, Evan. I won't let it go. She doesn't get to weaponize reputation and then cry when people push back. I just want peace." "You want silence," Pat corrected. "There's a difference." She ended the call gently but firmly. That night, Martha showed up with a Tupperware container, her grin smug and unapologetic. "What's this?" Pat asked, as she opened the lid. "Hammer cookies," Martha said. "Almond sugar. I thought they'd taste better than smashed electronics." Pat laughed for the first time in days. The cookies were buttery, crisp, and shaped like tiny tools. Icing in neat outlines. A little overkill, a little perfect. They ate 3 each. At 9:46 p.m., Pat's phone buzzed with a new email from Jonas. Subject: cease and desist. Served body delivery confirmed. Time stamped 7:12 p.m. EST. She's been officially notified. We wait now. Pat sat back in her chair and stared out the window. Outside, the house was still. Untouched. Untouchable. Inside, her boundaries had finally been enforced in writing. The fountain pen scratched against the final page, smooth and deliberate. Pat didn't flinch as she signed. Her name, bold and unmistakable, sealed the most personal decision of her life, one Lori would never see coming. Across the desk, Jonas Keller leaned forward, flipped the signature page and stamped it with a satisfying thunk. The weight of the embossed seal echoed in the room like a closing door. "That's it," he said. "Your estate is fully finalized. Everything is where you want it, and nothing is where it doesn't belong." Pat folded her hands in her lap. "That's the point." He gave a small approving nod. "The Greenhouse Trust remains in place for the remainder of your life. And upon your passing, the property will transfer to the Columbus Children's Literacy Initiative. They'll convert it into a reading center, and the foundation has agreed to maintain the home's character, your legacy in both form and function." Pat's voice was quiet but clear. "It'll be used to teach kids how to read, not teach adults how to manipulate." Jonas smiled gently. "And Martha will serve as trustee until the transfer is executed. She's legally empowered to manage everything." Pat glanced to her left, where Martha sat with a clipboard on her lap and a raspberry scone in her hand. "You okay with being the gatekeeper?" Martha took a bite, chewed and gave a thumbs up. "I've been waiting to shut that woman out with paperwork. This is my Super Bowl." They all laughed, softly, briefly, but beneath the humor was steel. Jonas slid another folder forward. "One more thing. Per your instructions, Evan receives a modest trust payout, enough for college savings, something small for the kids. Lori receives nothing. Her name appears nowhere in these documents." Pat didn't blink. "That's correct. You're certain?" he asked. "Always giving one final out." "I gave her every chance," Pat said. "She broke a phone, but what she really shattered was any illusion of respect." Later that afternoon, Jonas left with the signed documents in his briefcase. He would take them directly to the Franklin County Recorder's office for filing. Pat stood in the entryway as he walked to his car, the breeze lifting the edge of her sleeve. The sky was cloudless, the kind of blue that felt earned. The porch bell rang 15 minutes later. Renee stood on the steps with a wrapped bouquet of wildflowers in one hand and a to-go iced coffee in the other. "I heard today was official," she said with a grin, handing over the flowers. "Figured this porch deserved something cheerful." Pat accepted them with a rare softness. "Thank you, Renee. You've been more than a realtor through all this. I told you from the beginning, this house deserved to remain yours, no matter what last name came through the door." That evening, Pat placed the bouquet in the vase that used to sit on her husband's old workbench. It belonged in the foyer now. The petals opened under the golden light, like they had always been waiting for this moment. She sat by the window with a cup of tea, scrolling through the day's emails. Then her phone buzzed. Subject: Credit flag notification. Jonas Keller CC'd. The message preview made her sit forward. Attempted mortgage application blocked. Co-applicant listed in active cease and desist litigation. Pat clicked the email open. Jonas had forwarded her a copy of a real estate firm's internal alert. Lori had attempted to co-sign a mortgage on a new home, with Evan. The bank's system flagged her immediately, due to the active legal action tied to the public cease and desist. Application denied. Reason: pending defamation action plus trust conflict. Greenhouse case. Pat stared at the screen. Not with glee, not with revenge, just clarity. Lori hadn't just lost a home. She'd lost the future she built on someone else's foundation. The envelope was thick, ivory-colored and handwritten. Pat turned it over in her hands twice, before slicing it open with the same letter opener she'd once used to open birthday cards from Evan as a boy. Inside, a folded letter on heavy linen paper and a brochure. The letter was warm, typed in classic serif, with a real signature in blue ink at the bottom. "Dear Mrs. Green, we are honored and deeply grateful for your generous planned gift to the Columbus Children's Literacy Initiative. Your home will provide not just space, but hope. A safe, imaginative, and welcoming place for generations of young readers. We look forward to honoring your name in our permanent reading room. With gratitude, Madeline Ray's executive director Pat held the page a moment longer, her thumb grazing the embossed letterhead. Across the table, Martha reached for the brochure. "Oh my God," she said, flipping through glossy renderings of beanbag chairs, child-sized bookshelves, cozy reading nooks. "They're calling it the Patricia Green Fund Reading Room." Pat blinked slowly. "It looks brighter than I pictured." Martha grinned. "You're a legacy now, Pat. And you didn't even need to die first." They visited the library the next afternoon, walking through its tall arched doors as curious staff peeked over circulation desks and whispered behind hand-painted signage. Madeline Reyes, young, sharp, all charm and purpose, greeted them at the front. "We're still renovating the upstairs," she said, "but the community room is where your plaque will go." She led them past shelves of children's books, soft carpeting beneath their feet, and the scent of old paper and lemon-scented polish clinging to the air. On the wall, freshly installed, was a bronze rectangle mounted beneath a mural of cartoon owls reading books under a tree. It read "Future Home of the Patricia Green Fund, in honor of literacy legacy and the woman who believed children deserve both." Pat stared at it without speaking. Martha did the talking. "It's perfect." Madeline smiled. "We're honored." Pat finally reached out and touched the plaque, her fingers resting against the cool metal. For the first time in weeks, she felt her chest loosen. Not from revenge, but from relief. That night, back at the house, Pat watered the porch plants and watched the last of the sun tuck itself behind the neighbor's rooftop. The house was quiet, almost serene, but there was no emptiness in it. Only space. Her phone buzzed beside her on the railing. "Evan, Mom, we need to talk." She stared at it, then typed back with no hesitation. "Pat, I'm busy living my life." She didn't wait for a response. Didn't need one. She walked back inside, closing the door behind her with the sound of finality. The next morning, as she arranged a fresh bouquet from Renee in the foyer vase, her phone rang. "Pat," Renee said cheerfully. "Just a heads up. The first tenants are confirmed. They're arriving this Saturday." Pat smiled. "What's the profile?" "Mid-30s, married, pediatric nurse and high school English teacher. Just moved from Arizona. Quiet, clean, no pets." "They're excited." "Did you mention the reading room connection?" "I did," Renee said. "They loved it." Pat looked around her living room. Still her furniture, still her rules, but now a place ready to be shared without being surrendered. "Tell them welcome," she said. "And tell them the house has good bones." The smell of lemon oil still clung to the baseboards. Pat stood in the hallway with a microfiber cloth in one hand and a checklist in the other, ticking off the final tasks with the same precision she'd once used for school lunches and tax returns. This wasn't just tidying. It was transformation. In the kitchen, Martha was on her knees, scrubbing the grout with a toothbrush and humming something that sounded like a Sinatra tune. Pat peeked in. "You know we hired cleaners last week." Martha looked up without stopping. "And yet I don't trust anyone with grout but me." Pat grinned and crossed it off the list. The floors gleamed. The air smelled like citrus and pine. Every cushion was fluffed, every cabinet emptied of anything sentimental. The only thing that remained was intention, and Pat had left plenty of that in the walls. They opened a bottle of wine after the final wipe down. No coasters, no rules. Just two women in a spotless kitchen, glasses sweating onto the counter, the fridge humming contentedly behind them. "To the end of an era," Martha said, raising her glass. "To the start of one," Pat replied, clinking softly. They sipped, leaning against opposite ends of the kitchen island. Outside, cicadas buzzed in waves. The wind moved lazily through the trees, carrying the faint scent of magnolia and grass clippings. "Feels strange," Pat admitted. "To be sharing it." "You're not giving it away," Martha reminded her. "You're choosing who gets to belong here now." Pat smiled. "It's not a home if it's held hostage." Just before 3 p.m., the moving van pulled into the driveway. A neat white box truck. No flashy logos, just a couple stepping out, laughing over which box held the coffee maker. The woman wore scrubs under a zip-up hoodie. The man had a clipboard and a smile like he'd already picked his favorite reading chair. Pat watched from the window. She didn't go out. Not yet. They seem good, Martha said, peeking through the blinds. They feel right, Pat replied. They turned back toward the hallway, ready to give the new couple space, when a second vehicle appeared. Slower, darker. Lori, driving past at a crawl. Windows tinted, engine barely audible. She didn't stop, just lingered long enough to stare at the van, the porch, the front door, and then for the briefest moment their eyes met. Pat didn't wave. She didn't nod. She simply reached up and pulled the blinds shut. Behind her, Martha let out a bark of laughter. Pat joined her. It felt like exhaling a decade's worth of weight. 20 minutes later, the doorbell rang. Pat opened it to find the new tenants standing with a glass vase between them, sunflowers, daisies, and a note tucked inside. "Just a little thank you," the woman said, her voice warm, "for letting us call this place home." Pat accepted the flowers with both hands. "Take care of it," she said. "The house knows when it's being loved." They smiled, thanked her again, and walked back inside, laughing about takeout menus and the debate between pizza or Thai for dinner. The door closed gently behind them. Pat stood for a moment longer on the porch, watching the light shift across the yard. The hydrangeas she'd planted were blooming again, steady, unbothered, just like she'd taught herself to be. She reached into her pocket, pulled out her phone, a new one finally, and slid it back into place. It wasn't about what had been broken anymore. It was about what had survived. Some things you replace, others you make untouchable.